Welcome back, Double Team fam. Just me here today. This is Nikki, but I do have a guest with me. Very excited to bring her on the show. This is Dr. Kate Balistrari. She is a psychologist, sex therapist, and founder of Modern Intimacy.
Hi, thanks for having me today.
Welcome. Okay, so we met you at the Sex on the Beach event, which was amazing. I'm curious, what were your thoughts on the event?
Oh, I love that event. It's the second time I've been now,
Okay.
and I was so honored to speak this year, but I think it's super fun.
Yeah.
Really great way to have sex positive community, because there just aren't enough events like that where you can go talk about sex, have fun. It's not super sterile and boring. It's like actually the opposite. It's really fun, great music, great food. So I love it.
Yeah. For our guests that don't know, I think Kimmy and I had mentioned it on the show a few episodes ago that we had been invited to this event. We loved it too. I thought all the key players were there. I felt like I Know Sex with Emily was there, and a lot of really great brands that are really wanting to do good work in the sexual wellness space. So I love that about it. And that was our first time going, so we hadn't been yet.
Yeah, it's super fun.
I know. So hopefully we'll get invited back to the next one. So for those of you in SoCal, she does it every
year around the same time.
Okay, so
end of
every
July,
year,
or beginning of August-ish.
Okay, that's what I thought, because someone had mentioned it was around the same time last year as well. So yeah, we'll post that on our socials next time the event comes around. But as some quick little icebreakers, first one I wanted to see or ask, especially I know you do. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you do a lot of work in kind of the sex positivity space.
Yeah.
And so what is one of your favorite sex facts to tell people, or maybe something that's not commonly known?
Oh.
Something along those lines.
Well, for a long time, we didn't study the clitoris because women were just sort of thought of as small men in science.
Oh.
And they didn't really think it was important. But now that we've started to study the clit, we know that it's the only human organ that is designed only for pleasure, which is pretty amazing. That's its only purpose, is pleasure. And it's way more than just the little head that you see on the outside of your body under the clitoral hood. It's got this huge internal component to it, complete with bulbs and legs. And when you get aroused, so does your clit.
Yep.
And it expands, and it's amazing. And it has about 10,000 nerve endings, which is 2,000 more than we thought it had about a handful of years ago. Because again, we thought it was just a small penis, like a small version of a penis.
Yeah.
And look, there are a lot of similarities in the anatomy, because as Emily Nagoski says, we all have the same, pieces and bits. They're just organized in different ways. And that's totally true. But the clit's super special in the sense it has way more nerve endings, and it's just kind of my favorite human organ.
I love that. I recently looked at a graph that showed the whole thing, and I remember one time, because the bottom of it, you can kind of see around the vaginal opening when it gets aroused, and it's so fascinating to me when you see it kind of fully engorged, when you are fully aroused, which takes some time to get there. But I didn't learn that until that there was more to it. I think wasn't until about maybe 2-3 years ago. So, and I'm 30. So for most of my 20s, I had no idea what my clit was like.
Don't feel bad. I didn't learn about it until I became a sex therapist.
Oh, really?
And I'm in my 40s now. So
Wow, yeah.
There's a lot of life to go
Yeah.
not knowing that information. And I think a lot of people really don't, but it's pretty fascinating.
Is there the equivalent of a piece of the man's anatomy that's just for pleasure? Do you know?
No.
There's not?
No.
Oh.
No.
Well, good for us.
The clitoris is the only piece of anatomy, human anatomy, regardless of biological sex or gender, that is just for pleasure. It has no other function. That's pretty amazing.
No, that is.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know if that was if men had anything that was like that. I love that.
Nope.
At least our bodies were you have to give birth to children. We will at least give you this.
You can at least have a little pleasure bell. Have a good time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then another question. This is one of my favorite to ask. And it's more personal. If you don't want to answer it, totally fine.
Okay.
But what's your favorite place you've had sex?
Oh, what is my favorite place? Maybe in an elevator
Oh,
somewhere.
really?
Yeah.
Was it super quick?
It was, although we did pull the stop so we could have a little bit of a longer time.
Oh my
It
goodness.
was in a hotel somewhere.
That's amazing. I've never had someone say an elevator.
Really? What's your favorite place?
A sand dune off the coast of off the Pacific Coast Highway on past Malibu.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was nighttime under a full moon. My guests, our listeners have heard this before. And yeah, it's just like this big sand dune off the side of the highway. And this one guy that I knew him for years, but we never met. We knew each other from Bumble. We never met. And it was Valentine's Day, and neither of us had a Valentine's Day. And he was like, do you want to like get together? But he lived in like Santa Barbara. So I was like, sure, what's like a good halfway point? And he was like, this sand dune. And we weren't planning to have sex. We just like brought a bottle of wine and we're just like laying on a blanket under this like full moon. It was really cute. And then we just started having sex and it was great.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It sounds so fun.
It was fun. But the elevator, I've never tried an elevator. That would be hot though. I think, did you ever read 50 Shades of Grey?
I did read that a long time ago.
Yeah. Remember the elevator scene where he like finally kisses her? My mind immediately went to that. And like in the movies, it was super hot.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah.
Definitely want to make sure that nobody sees you though, because it is illegal, right? So take some precautions so that you're protecting other people and yourselves.
Yeah. How do you pull the stops on an elevator?
This was a long time ago, and it was an old elevator in an old boutique hotel. So there was nobody around. It was super late.
Love that.
And it had one of those little pulls that you just like could pull the stop out, so it would pause on the floor where you were. So we just had a few extra moments.
I love that. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for answering that. Okay. So to get into a little bit of like the work that you do, I know you have the pod, and what is your focus on the podcast?
Yeah, so on Get Naked with Dr. Kate, I really try to have real conversations, authentic conversations about anything that relates to sex, mental health, and relationships. So that's a lot of things. Sometimes I'll talk about anal sex. Sometimes I'll talk about resilience and healing from trauma. So it's pretty diverse in the topics that we dive into.
Love that. And then, but for your other work, what is that centered around? So like sex therapy and all of that?
Modern intimacy is the practice that I own, and we have providers licensed in over 10 states.
Oh, wow.
And then we have a few providers who can practice internationally, and we all, again, sort of help people right along that line of where mental health meets their relationships, meets their sexuality in some way. So we do a lot of work with folks who are struggling with sexual dysfunction, so maybe they can't have an orgasm or they can't maintain an erection. We help people who are healing from sexual trauma. We help people who want to be more expansive in their sexuality and they don't know where to start. So we help them explore things like, should we open our relationship, or how do we factor in some kink? We work with folks who are healing from infidelity, compulsive or problematic porn use or sexual behavior. So kind of anywhere where that rubber meets the road.
Love that. And is it kind of like standard talk therapy, or do you guys do other kind of therapy?
Yeah, so we use a lot of different styles of intervention, mostly, well, it's all talk therapy. We don't use any physical touch in our practice, but we do engage in a lot of somatic work. So helping people get in their bodies and learn how to regulate differently, how to process what's going on in their body, because, here's one of the fun things about sex. It feels a lot better when you can feel. So you have to know how to feel and feel safe feeling things in your body or feeling things emotionally. Yeah. And that's something that we don't really learn how to do well in our culture that's so hustle.
No, actually, and Cami and I were talking about this recently, because her and I are kind of in, new relationships, and, both of them, I mean, I won't speak for her, but I know hers feels very healthy as well, but mine does too. And I find that sometimes I'm just like, my body like almost doesn't know what to do with it.
Right? Yeah.
And I'm just like, is it supposed to feel this good all the time? Like, why am I not feeling, all the normal, like anxious, all those kind of things. So, but Cami does somatic therapy. I used to do talk therapy. I haven't done it in a long time. And I've never tried somatic therapy, but now that I'm like in this new relationship and it's going really well, and we're very like aligned in what we want, I'm kind of thinking like, okay, maybe I need to get back into therapy.
Yeah. Go ahead. It's amazing, right? And and like using that integrated, it's called a top down and bottom up approach. So top down is like talk therapy, because it engages our conscious process first, and then that sort of, metabolizes down into our bodies. And then bottom up therapy is somatic therapy, where we kind of get into the body and into the physiological aspects of emotions first. And then that makes its way up to our consciousness. So it's like a mind-body integration. Yeah.
I haven't done talk therapy in probably over a year. So if I wanted to get back into it, what would you recommend? Going into talk therapy or starting with somatic therapy?
Well, somatic therapy will likely include some talk therapy.
Okay.
Unless your practitioner only does body work, which I would imagine probably isn't the case for most therapists, and probably some blend. But yeah, I would think maybe first consider, what do you want to get out of therapy, and then find a therapist who is skilled in helping you materialize that. So like if you want to learn how to, let me rephrase that. A lot of folks will come in and they'll say, I've been in talk therapy for trauma for years and years and years, and I'm over it, in air quotes, but my body doesn't seem to get that message, right?
That's where I'm at.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, I was explaining that to my partner. It's like, you know, because I went through a divorce, and it was like very, you know, painful, obviously. And it's like, I told him, I was like, I can make sense of everything that happened. And like, I find my reasoning. I understand it all. Like I have no issues with it. But it's like my body is still like freaking out sometimes. And it's just like, oh, no. We don't want to put ourselves in this situation again. What are you doing? Yeah. So it's like there's like this disconnect, and I'm trying to like figure out what's like the best way to start like bridging that, or like working on it, just because I don't want it to like get in the way of anything in my relationship, or like as I'm like, so yeah, I've been kind of trying to figure out how I want to immerse into therapy.
Yeah. Well, hearing what you're saying, I think some kind of trauma-informed somatic work would probably be a really good step right now, because when we have really hard experiences or traumatic situations, our bodies keep a record of that. They keep like a resonance of that. And so often there's a disconnect between mind and body in terms of making sense of it, but also no longer holding on to that need for hypervigilance or self-protection, which is what usually is the last thing to go in someone's body, right? The body's like, but, are we safe? Am I safe? Can I let go? Is it okay? Is it okay?
Yeah.
And the mind is like, yeah. And the body's like, but are you sure?
Yeah.
And so helping the two of them really get on the same page with somatic work can help the body go, oh God, okay.
Yeah. That's exactly where I feel like I'm at.
Yeah.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. Not to turn it into my own personal...
No, but I think a lot of people are in that space, right? Because talk therapy has been wonderful for decades, but there definitely are limitations when we're talking about healing through trauma. And I don't know one human who hasn't had some kind of trauma. So, you know, most of us are well served by learning how to be in our bodies a little bit more effectively.
You know, speaking of like traumas, it's funny because I was actually, you know, him and I were talking about like past relationships this morning, and you know how like in past relationships we like ignored red flags, and we were like trying to see if we were like finding any within each other, and I told him, I was like, well, you know, because he didn't bring up any of my like past traumas, and I was like, thank you for not seeing those as a red flag. He was like, well, no one's perfect, we all have traumas. And he was like, but you know, like I realized in that moment, I'm like, I'm aware of them, like I'm working on them, and so like I think, you know, it becomes a red flag when people ignore them.
Yeah.
And not work on them, or maybe, you know, are completely unaware of them and they don't see that in themselves. But like, you know, if it is something you're actively working on, I don't know, that perspective shift on its own kind of this morning was a little bit of a breakthrough for me.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I would kind of carry my trauma and be like, oh, this means that like you know, that might not make me desirable, or that might not make me like, you know, someone might see that and be like, oh, she's got too much to like work on or whatever. So yeah.
See, I would see that as a red flag if someone's judging you for your trauma.
Oh, good point.
That would be the red flag for me. I'd be like, whoa, you don't understand how trauma works, because people don't volunteer for trauma.
No, it's true.
It happens. It's something that's out of their control. And a lot of people will protect themselves by not leaning into it, by not addressing it. And sometimes that can be okay for a little while. Sometimes people start to do what some of us in the therapy space call leak. The trauma leaks into their lives, because you can't really just keep a lid on it all the time. It's like, it's going to affect you somewhere, somehow, potentially down the line. But look, everyone's doing the best they can to heal and protect themselves and keep themselves safe. So if someone's judging you because you have trauma, I would say, yikes, that person might have some red flags going on. They might struggle with empathy.
Yeah.
They might struggle with taking perspective. They might be someone who victim blames. And that to me doesn't feel safe emotionally.
No, I would agree. Yeah, that's why I told him, I was like, thank you for not seeing them as red flags. I was very appreciative of that. So now, do you personally work with clients? Because I know if you ever see, okay, I'm curious. Well, there's two parts to this question. The first part being, like, what do you notice any like positive trends in terms of how like people are like handling, or like in terms of like relationships or sexuality, you know, in those two spaces? Like, are you seeing any positive trends in how like people are starting to maybe more like contribute more positively to their own sexuality?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the really cool things about being a sex therapy practice is that we get to be in this really emotionally intimate space with people where they're asking big questions to themselves or of themselves and with their partners about what do we want sex to be in our lives. And that's a really cool space to be in, where you can create whatever feels resonant with you and your partner if you're partnered. So what I'm seeing right now is a lot of folks are saying, I grew up with a lot of conservative ideas about sex, a lot of sex negative ideas about sex. And I think that that's been limiting, not only in my sex life, but in the way I see the world, right? Because our relationship with sex is very similar to our relationship with a lot of how we do life, right? And so a lot of people are saying, this feels really like overly constrained. It feels restrictive. I have a lot of shame around this, and I don't want to feel that way. I'd like to actually have space for pleasure and for a yes and for more expansiveness and more openness in my sexuality. And I think that's really, really amazing, and it's really special for the time that we're in. Right? Like, we are in a time of huge human growth.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
Right? And there's a lot of pushback on that, as there always is when there are big progressive movements. But yeah, a lot of people are saying, I want a sex life that feels amazing, and I don't want to apologize for it or feel bad about it. And I'm here for that work.
Yeah, I would agree. And we've noticed that too with like, not only our own sex lives, and I mean, we're very grateful that like for us, the pod kind of really like opened our eyes to it. But yeah, I just remember like growing up, like you're just kind of always taught that like, you know, sex is for only certain things, and you're not, you know, it's supposed to hurt, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you know, now I feel like everyone's really starting to take control of their sex lives. And we're very spiritual. So like for us, it's kind of been a, you know, both happening at the same time. But I'm always happy to, like, I feel like I have more friends that are like asking about vibrators.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've become like the friends that people come to with all the sex questions, but, you know, or like more curiosities. Even like my guy friends are like, you know, having more questions and whatnot. And so like, it's good to see people, like you said, asking the big questions. Okay. Now on the flip side of that, are you noticing any trends that you're like, oh, we need to stop this? Or like, oh, this is not like maybe a good trend, or like I don't want to use the word negative, but maybe like something that you'd like to nip in the bud?
A couple of things. One, if I were queen of the universe, we would all immediately stop using the phrase body count right now.
Oh my God, yes.
It's so annoying. It's so imperialistic.
Yeah.
And it's so violent.
Yeah.
And it's such like a conquering mentality that it just is super gross to me to think about sex in that way. But also the double standard around it, right? Like shaming women and people in female bodies for their body count.
Yeah.
I think is just one of the silliest regressions of humankind, and speaks to all kinds of insecurities and misunderstandings about sex, but also how love works and how affection works and how intimacy really works emotionally. You know, like believing that somebody's ability to connect and bond with someone because they've had multiple sexual partners is such a flagrant error in understanding the way anything human works. So I would love for us to get rid of that right away.
Yeah.
I would also love for people to stop referring to other people as high value or low value.
Oh.
Partners or people on this like sort of quote unquote dating marketplace or the sexual marketplace. again, like so unnecessary, this conflation of worth and sexual behavior that really does speak to this like social dominance need and the overcoupling of dominance with power and worthiness that frankly it just gives most women that I know the ick.
Yeah.
So if you're a straight guy listening and you're using that language, I would encourage you to stop immediately because it's a huge ick factor for a lot of women.
I would agree. Many times I've seen men specifically that use that term, and I'm like, immediately no.
Yeah.
It's like an automatic, like, I will not sleep with you. I don't even want to entertain you. I don't want to have another conversation with you.
Yeah. I won't even finish this drink with you. We're done.
Yeah. I'm curious, did you ever keep track of your, like, that's what, like, for me, it was never I think like in high school, back to the body count thing, I was just remembering that, like, I think, high school, I was like, oh man, I gotta like keep it low, blah, blah, blah. And then I just like hit a point where I'm like, why does it even matter? Yeah. And I like never paid attention to it again.
Yeah.
And then I'd have people ask and I'd be like, I couldn't even give you an answer. I have no idea. Maybe I can give you like a range, but I don't care. And it's just like, that was never a priority.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah. I'm so glad to hear that you're not even invested in that number because it's so unimportant. I got really bad sex education when I was growing up. I'm sure I'm not alone in that. But one of the pieces of information that they told us when we were getting, the big talks about sex is one, don't have sex, of course, unless you're married, which is such terrible advice. But two, they were like, if you're going to be sexual, you should keep a list of everyone that you've ever been sexual with so that if you get an STI, you can contact everyone. So for a long time, that's what I was doing. I was keeping this list just in case.
They said that?
Yeah.
Really?
It was the worst sex ed. It was the worst. This is one of the reasons why I became a sex therapist because just so much bad advice when I was growing up. So don't do that. If anyone tells you to do that, that's not something that you need to worry about. But yeah, so I kept track for a really long time. And then one day I was like, this is dumb.
Yeah.
This is dumb. I'm not going to contact someone I had sex with a year ago if I get an STI today.
Yeah.
Like, what am I doing? So I just let it go.
I love that.
Yeah.
Can you think back to like any other really empowering moments in your sex life where you were just like kind of, whatever box or, lines were given to you, you were just like, fuck that.
Yeah.
And moved on.
Yeah. Well, also, I when I was getting all of my information early about sex as a human before I professionally got into this space, I also inherited a lot of really terrible ideas about what it meant to be a woman who has sex with men. And what I mean by that is how to not prioritize my own pleasure. So I remember when, for the longest time, I just could not have an orgasm with a male partner. And I could with women, and I could by myself. And I couldn't understand why. And then one day I was reading something, and it all clicked, that they were deprioritizing my pleasure, and so was I. So I stopped doing that. And I also stopped faking my orgasms. And I still didn't have orgasms for a while, but it was really empowering to stop faking them because now that anxiety just wasn't on me.
Yeah.
Right? When they would say, did you come? And I would say no, they'd be really surprised, first of all, because I think a lot of women do and have faked a lot of orgasms. So I found it to be really important feedback for them because then they started to get more curious about, well, why aren't you having an orgasm? And what can I do differently? And when they had to sit with some of the anxiety of that reality, it became fodder for different conversation. So
I really like that perspective.
Faking.
Yeah, no. I like that perspective a lot because I used to fake them occasionally and a lot of time. And I never thought about it how like maybe if I hadn't that they would have actually questioned themselves more. Yeah. So that's good. Would you say, like in terms of your male clients coming in, are they expanding, their minds a little bit more and like asking more about like balancing the lines of pleasure? Do you see that trend or no?
I do. I don't see it enough. I'd like to see more. And what I would like to see more from men who have sex with women is more curiosity about what brings women pleasure and less fixation on getting an orgasm. Because I think a lot of men are still fixated on the orgasm meaning something about who they are as a lover. So in that very indirect way, they're still co-opting their partner's pleasure for their own ego. And that makes it really hard to have a mutually pleasurable experience.
Yep.
If you need someone to have an orgasm so you can feel okay about yourself. Now, I also understand it can feel really awkward if your partner's not experiencing that pleasure. But I would say let's focus on pleasure, but don't focus on orgasms, right? That's the best way to close that orgasm gap, because that orgasm gap is still alive and well.
I hate the fixation on squirting.
I know.
I'm so over it. Can we just move on from that? Not every girl can do it. I mean, you have to really like relax into it. Don't get me wrong. Like, I would love to be able to do that. And like, I have curiosities around it just because like, I like to see, I've seen other people do it. And I'm like, I would love to see if my body can do that, or like what that would look like for me, how that would feel. Like, I have curiosities around it. However, I'm so tired of like the fixation on it because like, yeah, you're talking to guys that you're dating, and like, especially like when it comes to more sexual conversations, one of the top questions you always get, do you squirt?
Yeah.
Are you a squirter, etc. And I'm just like,
why do you think that's so important to some men?
I think it's the ego thing, like you were saying, because I think they need like a visual representation of it. And orgasms for women are not visual.
Right.
Whereas like for men, yeah, they've got, ejaculation, everything.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's very visual for them and for us too, because then we get like kind of that like visual confirmation. And maybe it does have something to do with the fact that women have faked their orgasms. So they're like, we don't ever really know, but if she's squirting, then 100%.
But no, not 100%, because a squirt is not an orgasm.
That's
These
true.
are two very different things. And again, we've like conflated male bodies with female bodies here. Just like an ejaculation is not an orgasm either.
That's
These
true.
are two separate.
You could separate them.
Yeah, they're two separate things, but they often happen at the same time for people with penises. So for people with vulvas, there is this like hyperfixation on if they squirt, then they came. There's a myth around that, but that's not always a reality. And I hear from a lot of women that squirting can feel nice, it can feel good, but they're not having orgasms when they're doing it. And so I think it's super important to make sure that you understand this may not be the pleasure, the pleasure goal for your partner that it is for you.
No, that's true. 100%. And actually, when you mentioned that, I was like, oh wait, yeah, that doesn't always mean it's an orgasm. Very similar to how it can be for a man. But no, I've seen some squirters. It's very, I think it's like fun and cool to watch, but at the same time, I think a lot goes into it. And I'm just so over like feeling this like, oh, I need to try and make it happen. Like if it does, great. If it doesn't, that's fine. I'll let it go.
Exactly.
But I'm glad I don't know, I'm trying to think of like my more recent partners in terms of like, if anyone like has actually put more effort into focusing like on my pleasure as well, or like at least keeping it balanced. I agree. It definitely tends too much to be about the orgasm, but like, I guess I just wish men got a little bit more creative.
Yes.
Like I tend to be someone that likes a lot of creativity in the bedroom, especially like when I've explored kink and all of that. Like I love exploring the different erogenous zones. Yeah. And, and maybe it's because for men, everything is like so hyper fixated on the penis that they think everything is fixated on, the vulva. But sometimes I'm like, we've got other things to work with.
There's a whole terrain here. And the more you incorporate the terrain, the better it's going to be for the genitals. Yeah, I agree. But I think, so let me preface this by saying I'm not someone who is against porn or erotic media at all. But this is one of the biggest downsides of porn, mainstream porn, because it's so like POV and genital focused that it doesn't really showcase a lot of creativity in cultivating pleasure for all partners involved. It's very organized through the male gaze in a lot of mainstream porn, and it doesn't really it doesn't do anyone justice when we're thinking about like the pleasure potential, right? So yeah, guys, if you're listening and you're watching porn, that's fine, but also maybe like read some things. I love Ian Kerner's book She Comes First, which is really good. Like incorporate more of the senses, more of the body. for yourself and your partner. Like, I think a lot of men are doing themselves a disservice when they are too focused on a genital experience, because they also have a huge terrain of sensory points on the body.
I'm curious if in more personal experiences, can you think back to any more creative partners that might have introduced you to something about yourself?
Oh, yeah.
What's one that comes to mind specifically?
Let's see. Well, I think probably one of the things that I remember the most is being introduced to restraints from with a partner who also hadn't done much exploration in this space. So we were kind of just playing around and didn't really know what we were doing, but we figured it out fast. And for me, that sort of sensory deprivation actually was pretty interesting.
Nice.
From a pleasure potential perspective.
Have you explored it more so?
Yeah, a little bit here and there.
Okay. I love restraints. I think they're so fun. Actually, that Sex on the Beach event, the goodie bag,
yes,
had the silk.
Yes.
Oh my God.
They're amazing.
Yeah. Have you used them?
Maybe.
I haven't used them yet, but like I'm so excited too. I think they could probably double as a blindfold too.
Totally.
Yeah.
I really love. They're from Lunatic Femme, by the way, and they are part of their. I can't remember what it's called. It's like a sex kit. They've got 3 different sizes. So you can't buy them individually, which is such a bummer because they're amazing.
Yeah.
But they're these really beautiful like silk ties, and they're very long and they're nice and wide. So yeah, they would double nicely as a blindfold, or they intersect with one another. There are slits in them, so
yeah,
that you can.
The slit is a game changer.
Yeah, then you can like really tie wrists and feet and ankles together.
Yeah.
Like, you can play with a lot of really cool bondage.
I love that. I haven't tried them yet, but I plan to. I've been very excited to try those out. Okay, yeah. Joy mode is basically like pre-workout for your dick. We've had some of our guy friends try it before, and let's just say it really puts you in sport mode. Yeah, it puts the sport in sport mode. Gives you that extra little boost. Maybe you're a little tired. Yeah. This is like specifically to help with blood flow. And it's also just like a good like supplement as well, for men's dick health in general. So if you want to give it a try, of course, we've got a promo code for you. Yes, go to tryjoymode.com. Again, that's tryjoymode.com. And use code DOUBLETEAM for savings. Now, in your practice, like with people, because I feel like kink has been kind of more, because it's still very taboo, obviously, but like I do feel like it's becoming more kind of explored. Like we see it a lot more in the media now. I remember there was a show on Netflix that I saw that like, it, opened my eyes even more so to what I had already explored myself. But yeah, I love to see the movement of people wanting to explore it, because like, even though, yes, you need to be very mindful of how you do it. And like, especially if you're incorporating a lot of tools and, pain and all of that, like you need to know what you're doing a little bit. But I love to see the trend that people are actually like exploring it more and everything. But yeah, what kind of curiosities are you seeing around it when people like, if they're bringing that, questions in around kink, what does that look like?
Well, I think one of the things that people struggle with kink is figuring out how to keep things sexy and fun and spontaneous, while also appropriately negotiating limits and boundaries and consent around things. And especially as you are introducing different kink practices that might come with risk factors, like that might include some pain or might include humiliation, or might include practices in the body where you might leave a mark or something of that nature. We really have to be careful to talk about everyone's yes, no, and maybes prior to engaging in something like that. Because one of the things that I am hearing a lot in my practice is coming from women and people in female bodies who are saying, I was with a partner. And typically when they're describing this is in a heterosexual context. And they're saying things like, and he just choked me. And I don't mind that, but he didn't ask.
Been there.
And right?
Yeah.
And so, here's one of these things that can be incredibly dangerous, by the way. The research on sexual choking, which is technically strangulation, right?
Yeah.
You choke on a gobstopper, But if someone puts their hands around your neck, that's a strangulation. So let's call it what it is.
Yeah.
It can be incredibly erotic, and it can build a lot of trust, and it can be fun, and it can enhance pleasure, and it can do a lot of really great things. But it's also super, super dangerous, because no matter how you're practicing it, if someone's squeezing your neck on the side or vertically or front and back, any restriction of airflow to the brain can lead to brain damage. And you may experience that even if it's not so tight that you'll see bruising. Right? And there's some really interesting research by Debbie, I think her last name is, I'm absolutely blanking on her last name. She wrote a book called Yes, Your Kid. So,
Never heard of that one.
yeah, it's really good. I'm totally blanking on her last name. But she's done some really amazing research about sexual choking and found that women are strangled more frequently and more aggressively, and more times during each sexual experience than men are.
Interesting.
And this is rarely happening with appropriate consent and safety precautions. So this is an example of like how something kinky has made its way into the mainstream, and it's a way that even teens are being introduced to what sex is, because it's so prevalently talked about and depicted in porn. So this is really scary. It's scary stuff, and not to be done flippantly.
No, I agree with that. I want to read that book now. Because I've always been a big fan of, some people call it breath play. I don't know what you want to call it, but I enjoyed it. However, I remember in my early days of exploring it, probably wasn't always the safest. And I have had guys that just like went for it in the middle of it. And I'm like, sure, I like this and I enjoy it. And, you know, and I hate that this happens in sexual experiences so often. You're just like, you didn't ask, but I'm going to let it keep happening because I do enjoy it. However, in the future, ask first. You know, that's one of my biggest, it's the same with like kissing. You know, so many men are like, they'll just kind of go for it. And I remember, you know, I was at a music festival over the summer. And well, it was two guys in one day, and they both asked before they kissed me. And each time I was like, thank you for asking, because I can't tell you how many times someone just goes for it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, sure, I'll do this in the middle of the experience, because you're like, I'm enjoying it, so I guess we'll continue. However, would have preferred to be asked first.
Well, and what if you're not enjoying it, but you also feel like, I don't know if I can say no?
Yeah.
Because what's their reaction going to be if I say no or reject them? I know a lot of people feel pretty caught off guard and pretty frozen in those moments.
And, you know, it kind of reminds me of, I remember you were talking in the panel about like feminine rage. Like that's, I think one of the most like angering things to me is that like, I can't tell you how many times I've been in the middle of an experience and I'm like, well, I'm enjoying this, so I'm just going to let this go on. Or I'm like, I'm not totally enjoying this, but like, I don't want to, you know, like I'll just wait until it ends and, you know, whatever, then maybe like I'll have a discussion about it. And sometimes like I am like both angry at them or like also myself, because I haven't always had like necessarily the strength or the will to like end whatever that might have been in that moment. And so then you just kind of leave, you know, and I think that comes with like getting older too, is like learning how to do that, because if not, like eventually you just kind of get to a point where like you just have all this kind of like pent up like anger towards like these situations where you didn't get to do what you wanted.
Right. Well, and also pent up anger, because why is all that emotional labor on you?
Yeah.
Right? Why are you the person who has to be the gatekeeper for the experience? Why isn't there a conversation happening that solicits your enthusiasm and your approval and your consent and your engagement, right? And is curious about what you want. Like that to me is the part that really invigorates a tremendous amount of rage. In my head sometimes, I remember being in experiences like that too when I was not partnered. And I would be thinking things like, you didn't even ask me what I like. And you're just like assuming that this is what I like because this is what you like. And it created for me this experience of, and this is very like subtle, but I felt a lot of desire from men who wanted to have an experience of me not an experience with me. And that for me just felt so objectifying and so like just rage inducing.
No, 100%. I know exactly what that feels like. Because then you just kind of feel like they're just like, oh, I want to experience this for this moment. And then like, I'm done.
Yeah.
And then, you know, they get what they want out of it. And then you're just kind of left feeling like, usually like shit.
Yeah. Like, oh, all right.
Yeah.
That was great.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Or whatever you even want to call the experience.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it's so interesting because, like I said, it just kind of slowly builds over time. And then obviously, like, usually years pass before you're finally like, oh, I should probably like learn better ways to handle this. Otherwise, like, it's just going to keep happening. And that's why, you know, youth is great and all, but sometimes like I don't envy the person I was back when, and I'm still working on it sometimes, you know?
Yeah. I mean, same, right? Like, I think being a woman in this world comes with a lot of really wonderful things, but one of the things that can be really challenging is this experience of how we are so sexualized at every stage in our lives. You know, I did this event a few years ago, and I asked women, and this has gone around on social media periodically too. I'm not the creator of this idea, but I asked women in the event how old they were the first time they remembered being sexualized by a man. And
like 12.
Exactly. I was like 4 or 5.
Wow.
Like, I remember just gross things being said that I didn't know what they meant when I was that young, but now as an adult, you know, just thinking like, oh.
Yeah.
And so many women said the same thing. Somewhere between, like, average age was between like 5 and 9 was their earliest time they remember something sexual being said about them.
Yeah, for me, I remember it was like around 11 or 12. That was like the earliest, but that's insane. I believe it though, 100%.
Right. Yeah. So this is a lifelong experience that a lot of women don't get a lot of consciousness around until they get a little bit older, a little bit wiser. They see other women experiencing it. They start talking about it. And then that rage just is so alive. Like, what? This is what's been happening? How were the people around me okay with this? Why hasn't anyone addressed this, right? And these are all really valid questions that don't get answered a lot. So, yeah, the rage is real for a lot of women.
I also think that's why, like, you see kind of an uptick in things like celibacy. For sure. And, you know, I remember, who was it? Bumble did like that ad that was like, celibacy is not the answer.
That I am convinced they were intentionally rage baiting.
I wonder because, like, and that's an app where you literally, the woman makes the move. Yeah. I don't get me wrong, I met a lot of great people on Bumble. I did. But during my dating days, however, I just remember, like, I remember I have said this on the pod many times. And every time I post a clip about it, people just get so angry. But I was like, I'm there. I'm the gift. Why do I need to be putting in like the effort to like court, like it, you know? And I'm not saying that like we need to like resort to gender norms or anything like that. But it did kind of like flip the script in a way that sometimes it kind of felt a little angering, because then like you almost like gave them even more power than they have already been given in the first place. And so, I mean, I didn't totally disagree with the app itself or like the premise of it. However, there were times where I was just kind of like, you know, in a way it felt as if, we were giving them even more power. So
well, because women were the ones who were initiating on that app, or because of the billboard ad specifically?
The initiating. No, the billboard definitely added to it, but but I was long off the app by then.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, I think that it's interesting, right? Like, this is one of the many ways that female empowerment has been co-opted by patriarchy, because men, I'll say hashtag not all men, but many men unconsciously do not even realize the depths of conditioning that they've been subjected to their whole lives. And they're not properly motivated to investigate. So they've not been doing the leaps and bounds, emotional and relational evolving that women have been doing around topics related to gender and power and equity. So you have a lot of women who are like, you know, like saying, I can do differently, I can do more, I can do this, I can do that. They're really leaning into their empowerment. And a lot of men are benefiting from that in all of these ways, and they're not doing their part to shift and to take up some of that advocacy and some of that labor, to change things.
I would agree. And I agree, it's not like all men, because I have seen some like wonderful men that are like do put in a lot of work, but like there is still such an imbalance in a lot of ways that again, that rage just like kind of continues to build in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, and I say this a lot. It's even the men that you know and trust and love and who love you and who really in their minds would move mountains for you. There still is a tremendous amount of deconstruction and unlearning that needs to happen, because that's how deep our patriarchal conditioning is for people of all genders in this country.
I would agree. When we were talking about like, the things, not asking for permission and the choking, I remember, or I was thinking earlier that another one of those that's like very mainstream lately that like also people don't ask permission about is like spitting. Yes, and I'm so over that one too. Yeah. I don't know why that one came to mind when we were talking about it, but that's another thing. And that one I think has so many connotations too when you think about like, outside of like the sexual space. Obviously, choking, that's illegal, but, or, in a way, but like with spitting, that one bothers me so much. And it's funny because like as we've had this conversation, I realized kind of like all the times that like it's just made me so angry thinking about that one specifically and why it drives me up a wall.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so much to be curious about there, because some people have a lot of ideas on what spitting means. And for most folks, I would say they associate spitting with some form of devaluation. Now, that may not be someone's intention all the time, but for a lot of folks, unconsciously, it is. And so, okay, that can be fine if you're going to play in that space, but get consent. Because for a lot of folks, being devalued is an immediate turnoff, especially if they haven't given permission to go into that kind of play. So then you're not really like having a fun sexual experience. You're just non-consensually being emotionally or physically sadistic. And I don't think that's what a lot of people are trying to do. But we sometimes get so caught up in what we are excited about and get turned on by that we forget there's a whole nother human with their own subjective experience in the mix who needs to be consulted.
Or what we think they want.
Right.
Yeah. Because I feel like, that's kind of the thing lately is people are like, oh, you see a lot of content about like, girls talking that they like this or whatever. And like you see the trends on TikTok and then you try it and like that person didn't like it. Yeah. Exactly.
Or didn't like that iteration of it.
Yeah.
Right. And yes, so thank you for saying that. Like we are all really dynamic beings. So today, in this day, in this mood that you're in, this sexual thing might seem really interesting, and tomorrow in a different mood, in a different headspace, or if you feel differently in your body, you might not be into it. Like people are not monolithic. Groups of people are not monolithic. Like I work with a lot of folks who will say, do men like this, or do women like this, or does this group like that? And I'll just say, do you think that it's possible for us to, one, gather every woman in the world and ask them that question to get consensus? And two, do you really think that it's a universal answer? And they'll say, no. Like, of course, everyone is different.
Yep. That reminds me, I did a pussy eating master class, and
that sounds amazing.
Because I've had a lot of experiences with women, and I did this master class, and I remember when I was editing it, I was like, along the way, like I told them many times, like ask about this, and at the end I was like, did I tell them to ask too many questions? But then I thought about it and I was like, if I had someone that asked me all these questions, I would have been fucking thrilled. Right. So to have been like, yes, no, and so that would probably be my number one advice to men is like, you can't ask too many questions in my opinion.
Well, I would say, be infinitely curious. Yeah. And also maybe ask the questions when you're not in a sexual space. Yeah. Because for a lot of people, talking about it in the moment can feel a little too clinical. And also like a lot of women have been conditioned not to be fully in their bodies during sex. So having someone be like, do you like this? Can I do that? Can I try this? Can I do that? For some women is like waterworks and it turns them on even more. For other women, they're like, why are you asking me so many questions? I just want to feel this. I can't focus on how I feel with the conversation happening. So be curious, but also be flexible in terms of read the room. If your person is shutting down, like quiet, you know, get consent, but also then just have the fun.
Yeah.
Talk about it after.
Yeah.
Or
That's good
before.
advice.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, we've got to wrap up here, but I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. For anyone that wants to find you, wants to find your practice, you seem like a wealth of knowledge, and I always encourage people to check out new ways to, discover more about themselves and, dive into their pleasure practices more. But yeah, where can they find you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was such a fun conversation.
Sure.
Folks can reach out. Probably our website is the best, which is modernintimacy.com. Or you can listen to my podcast, Get Naked with Dr. Kate. Or you can find me on TikTok and Instagram at Dr. Kate Balistreri.
Awesome. And I'll put those all in the episode description as well, for anyone that's curious. And then is it a conflict? I would like to find a new therapist. Do you have multiple that are like under your practice? How does that work?
Yeah. So we, my team, I think we have about 15 providers right now. So everyone's sort of on their own journey in their credentialing and their experience and becoming a sex therapist. But I'm going to brag a little bit. My team's amazing.
Awesome.
So we've got folks in California. If you want to, I can set you up with someone, or New York, Florida, Illinois, a whole bunch of states.
I'd love to check that out personally, because I've been feeling kind of more called to get back into it. But yeah. But anyways, thank you again.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it.
It's so good to be here.
Yeah. And then guys, you know where to find us at Double Team Podcast at Cami and Nikki, or head over to our website, doubleteampodcast.com. All relevant links are there. We'll see you next time.